Well, hello all. I would really appreciate it if you would give me feedback on this presentation because it's on a relatively new topic. And some of these ideas I've been thinking about for a long, long time, but some I've just been thinking about for a short time. And I would, for that reason, really value any frank feedback you can give me on this presentation. I want to show a PowerPoint deck. That PowerPoint deck is clobbered with text because it's the kind of deck I wanted to be able to email to people so you can read it and give me a feedback separately. So if you want to copy this deck, just shoot me an email to my email address, which is bob@uda.com. And I'll open up this deck now in just a second. Let me see here. I got to learn how to screen share. And all right. Screen share, window, here's the deck. Now, this presentation is going to get into what I think the 5 most significant issues are with the metaverse, the new threats. But first, I want to give you some information that I think is good background as we talk about the metaverse as security professionals. You know, how should we describe it to people? And how should we think about these threats in the context of being able to generate actions to better defend the metaverse? So the presentation does give some background and definitional stuff. It provides a framing of where we are in the movie. And then when it talks about the threats, it then talks about ways to mitigate some of these threats. Throughout this, I leave it open for suggestions. I would love your feedback either instantaneously in the chat or by email. Send me a note, please, at bob@uda.com. And I'll send you these graphics if you want to think about them and read them slowly. So let me start, though, with the bottom line up front. The metaverse is a term being used to express the next major wave of internet technologies. So the metaverse, we've seen hints of what it is already, and we'll talk about this next wave of internet technologies. But the thing we as security professionals need to ask ourselves is there any reason to believe this third wave of internet technologies will be more secure than the previous 2 waves of internet technology? No, there is no reason to believe that. In fact, there's reason to believe that there will be new threats that we have not really considered yet. So this is a key thing that this presentation hits hard. And also, I think it's extremely important that we security professionals focus more on this topic to be able to help serve the community with better solutions. What are these 3 waves of internet technologies? Well, the first, for those of you who were there at the beginning, was these interoperable computers that used protocols that helped exchange information smartly, the TCP/IP. And then quickly after that, the web came with these clickable links that would allow you to navigate through reams of data using hyperlinks. And shortly after that, the e-commerce and web applications, and all of this was facilitated by a lot of great engineering, this interoperable first web, and then the communications that was covering the earth at the time, which was mostly fixed line communications, a lot of copper wire, a lot of fiber, but it was a fixed line communications, a lot of Ethernet plugs and cables. The second wave of the internet was facilitated by Wi-Fi and cell data. It gave us the mobile web, mobile laptops, smartphones, and the ability to stream huge quantities of data to these mobile devices, including photos and videos and other streaming media. The Internet of Things was introduced in this second wave of internet technologies. The third wave, by the way, those first 2 waves are still with us and are still hard to secure. The third wave is a shared interoperable virtual world with a trust layer for store of value and user persistence in this collaborative world. Also more easily accessible via any device, not just browsers, but 3D goggles or many other devices, mobile phones. The ability to interact with this metaverse is a way where it's not just you on the outside, you are inside, you are in the metaverse. So this is the third wave. What is the metaverse? Here's something where definitions abound. The concept, of course, came from science fiction in the early 90s. Since then, a lot of people have been trying to build this metaverse. And a lot of folks attribute the name to, they associate the name with virtual reality. And that is a key component, the virtual reality. Others associate it with augmented reality. And that's also going to be a piece of the metaverse. Others associate it with collaborative tools and ability to interact with other people. That's also part of the metaverse. So what is it? Well, first, as I mentioned in the first bullet here, do not expect a single crisp definition of the metaverse that everybody agrees to. It's far too early for that. Most companies are now coming up with their own definitions of the metaverse. Most pundit and researchers are coming up with their definitions of the metaverse. I think we as security professionals just need to understand that whatever is defined is not yet built. So as it's being built, the definition can change. So my recommendation, only expect broad definitions and only accept broad definitions. If somebody comes to you and says, this is the metaverse, this is not, don't trust them so much. Here's what I broadly think of the metaverse. That said, it is massive. It's infinitely scalable. It is a shared virtual world where land, buildings, bots, avatars, and other property can be bought and sold and persist. So it is accessible by multiple devices, including the old devices and the web browsers, but also the new devices that give you that immersive 3D experience. Also smartphones. So it is accessible broadly. So another way to think of the metaverse, it's the future convergence of all of today's virtual worlds interconnected with a single settlement layer for totally interoperable transactions. For example, it could be Ethereum. So this is a key part of the metaverse, and linking these different worlds together is this settlement layer. And I've already mentioned that this needs to be interoperable and accessible by billions. And it's not just accessible by headset devices. It's accessible by mobile devices and your computer at home as well. So that's the metaverse. Is it here yet? I don't think so. You hear people using the term saying the metaverse is here, but I think we need to think of the metaverse as being several years out. Maybe the right way to think of it is the way William Gibson said, the future's here, it's just not evenly distributed. Well, so you can see parts of the metaverse today, little snippets, multiple smaller metaverses. For example, there's some great 3D virtual business collaboration tools that exist that let you interact with people as if you are really interacting with them. Maybe some of them show a cartoon avatar, others look very realistic, but we see it's coming. Now, these are small closed worlds where if you get more, sometimes if you get more than 10, 20, 100 people, the system crashes and it's not that scalable, but it's giving a hint at what's coming. Now, also think about Zoom and things like this spatial chat. In a way, we're doing things in the metaverse. Now, it's not the full expansive metaverse, but it's a hint at what is coming, the ability to collaborate and present and interact with each other and educate. Then there's the gaming environments, the most famous being Roblox and Fortnite, but there are many, many others. Call of Duty has given us hints at what may come. These gaming engines have been really huge in bringing people online and furthering the concept of a metaverse. There are other systems that are sort of like games, but they're bigger and broader. Decentraland, for example, is a 3D virtual world. You can think of it like the old The Sims or Second Life, but just on steroids. And it's done in a way where those who are in the world own a piece of it. You can buy avatar, you can buy clothing for your avatars, you can buy land, you can buy things to put on your land, or you can build things yourself. And you can own that and prove that you own it. So it's much more than the old Second Life, which has now been around for over a decade. These other systems I list here, the Sandbox, Engine, VRChat, CryptoVoxels, they all have a different take on it, but they're all showing us what may be coming in the metaverse. If you want to have some fun and play yourself and have not done it yet, I recommend VRChat. It's a place where you can create your own world and invite friends into it. So it's really cool. All of us have now seen Pokemon Go. This is a device. I mean, it's an ability to use devices and location data. If you haven't played it, please play it. Just to see it is so cool. Is this part of the metaverse? Now, some purists would say, no, that is augmented reality. But me, I say, no, I think this is a component that tells us what the future metaverse is going to be like, because some aspects of the metaverse will be tied to real geography. And so augmented reality is a key component of what's coming. Digital twins are here today. There are digital twins that can totally replicate a city. And then you are able to do things like project traffic flows over streets. You can replicate enterprise IT in a way that shows you is something about to fail, or I may want to modify something, so I want to simulate it in my digital twin. That too is a hint of what is coming. Then there's the new devices. Of course, the Oculus has been around for almost a decade. The Magic Leap and the HoloLens are continuing to improve every day, which can bring us into virtual worlds or augment the real world. Then there's also aspects of the metaverse that are coming out of the cryptocurrency world. This move to a Web 3.0 trust layer based upon interoperable cryptocurrencies is a way to prove ownership on internet-based things. And it's going to be a key part of the metaverse. There's so many other use cases that are in place right now, today, including in education. But healthcare is one that today is being helped by virtual worlds that gives us a hint at what's coming. So a lot of good stuff with the metaverse. Let's think about what could happen tomorrow as we continue to interconnect these things and make them more interoperable. Well, soon we will be able to have persistent simulations, and at scale, we will all be able to be in the same simulation at the same time. By scale, I mean scale to the size of billions. Nobody can do this yet in a persistent real-time simulation. This could be decades out. And what I mean by that is, although when you go into Fortnite or Call of Duty, it may seem like you're interacting with thousands of people. You're really not. You're on a server where you're interacting with hundreds at the most. And to interact with others, you actually have to jump to a different server. I'm talking about something like the Oasis from Ready Player One, where billions of people can get into the same simulation. That's going to be quite a ways from now. And that's why I say it could be decades. I will say that today, many businesses are already articulating a metaverse strategy. Very soon, every business will have a metaverse strategy. And also very soon, I would say 3 years from now, maybe 4, this will be a $1 trillion economy. So it's being tracked by the financial industry. Now let's talk about some of the realities of the metaverse. This is a favorite graphic from Matthew Ball. He's a financier and investor, runs an ETF investment fund that focuses on the metaverse. So he studies this consistently and continuously and writes about it. His framing is from the aspect of a investor. So he wants to know, what can I buy or invest in or build, or what will businesses do to grow in the metaverse? Here's how he describes this kind of investable capabilities of the metaverse. The metaverse, in his mind, requires these 7 things: the hardware, the compute power, the networking comms, the virtual platforms, including augmented reality and virtual reality, the protocols required for interoperability, the settlement layer I talked about, and then the content services and the assets and the ability to create. All of these he's tracking as investments. Now I want to slow down now and say, all right, what do we as security people need to be thinking about? We need to be thinking about what nobody else is right now. Really, I shouldn't say nobody, but too few are thinking about the issues of security. You know, Facebook announced they are a big metaverse company now, changed the name to Meta. In Mark Zuckerberg's first interview on this topic, he kind of said, hey, there may be some crime in the metaverse, but that's just like crime around here. You know, we'll deal with it. There's bad people everywhere. I think he was just really giving it the short shrift. And a lot more thought needs to be put into the threats in the metaverse. So with that, here's my view of the 5 most fearsome metaverse threats, the things that I think we really need to be worried about. We got to worry about all the old stuff too. I want to keep being concerned with issues of traditional security in the first two waves of internet technologies. In this third wave, think of these five. I titled the first New Privacy Threats. The second I call Mass Languor. The third is Ornithophrenia. The fourth is New Fraud Vectors. And the fifth I call Unleashing Demons. On the new privacy threats, already today, our privacy is under attack and it's very hard to protect. And all of us as individuals and as companies, we need to think about how to protect privacy of ourselves and our families. If we're companies, of our users, it's getting harder. We all have a digital life now that we didn't have in the past. Imagine what that digital life will be like when you are under 24/7 by 365 surveillance in a persistent 3D environment in the new metaverse. What will that reveal about you? Who wants to surveil you there? Well, the corporations that currently surveil you want to do that even more. The hostile nations want to do that. The criminal groups want to do that to facilitate their crimes. Any fraudster would like to get close to you and learn more about you so they can trick you out of your money or some other information. So the privacy threats of yesterday will continue, but the privacy threats in the metaverse are going to be tougher, and we have to consider that. And it's why I consider it one of the fearsome five metaverse threats. The mass languor. Imagine this, and by languor I mean weak mental state, lazy thinking. The dangers of today's social media are already apparent. You can get pulled into this stuff. You start looking at TikTok videos, next thing you know, 30 minutes are passed or an hour. You start getting into Twitter or Facebook or other things, and you start doom scrolling. Next thing you know, it's 2 a.m. Well, imagine what it's going to be like when the metaverse is here, when there are super realistic simulations that can give you all sorts of enticing things to do. Imagine the dopamine triggers that are going to be firing in your head, wanting to keep you into this state. It does, I think, pose a threat to all of us, old and young, that we get pulled into this metaverse and develop more laziness across humanity, a mass languor. And this kind of languor can contribute to mental weakness, which plays into some of the next two threats that I want to mention. The next threat, the ornithophrenia, this is the term that's applied when an individual loses their ability to separate reality from fantasy world, to know what is real and what is not. This becomes a more serious threat the more the metaverse becomes a real world like. You get pulled into this so much, and there's so much information and so much pleasure, so much fantasy, that you can start to lose a distinction over what's real and what's not. Now, keep in mind the last decade of what we've seen when it comes to misinformation and disinformation. And think about this in the world of the metaverse now, where not only is there the mass languor, but there's the people who have a hard time distinguishing between what's real and what's not. And you see how this can make misinformation and disinformation even more tough to fight and combat. This relates a bit to new fraud vectors. We talked about privacy threats already. We talked about mental weakness, the inability to distinguish between what's real and not real. All of that makes it easier for fraudsters to do what they want to be done. Now, good people want to build trust. Good companies want to build trust. Bad guys, the criminals, want to violate that trust in order to conduct fraud. And this is going to be a huge threat in the metaverse, which means we really need to think about defenses of from these new fraud vectors. The last one I called Unleashing Demons. Imagine the worst possible aspects of human nature. Some people think there's a little bit of bad in all of us. Imagine what the metaverse can do to pull that bad out and magnify it from all of us. It could get much, much, much worse. If we're not careful, if you think of the worst of human nature and the ugly things that we see currently on the internet, think of how that can be magnified in this metaverse of extreme virtual worlds where you can do anything you want. We need to think about this and the fact that those threats, think of the threat of bullying. I don't want to be bullied. I don't want anybody bullying me. I don't want anybody bullying my friends or family, business associates. But this metaverse may just amplify that in ugly, ugly ways. So these are what I think the 5 big fears are of the new metaverse. What do we do about it? One idea is we conceptualize more solutions by this kind of dialogue. And to facilitate this dialogue, we need a framework. I'm thinking it may be helpful to the dialogue if there's a framework that is focused on the actors in the metaverse. And that's what follows. This framework is an entity-based framework for metaverse security because I think this is important because it will allow us to start thinking through the expectations for each of these kinds of entities. And after you think through expectations, perhaps we can think through incentives, and in doing so, come up with hopefully a better approach. So with that, just some food for thought for each of these categories, what I think this framework says about metaverse security. For example, for individuals, for us, the people, well, I think all individuals need to spend some time learning more about security fundamentals, of course, privacy best practices. It's never too late, really. Learn privacy best practices and learn how to manage and store cryptocurrencies, because this is something the fraudsters are always going to want to come at you for. Learn how it works. If you're going to be in the metaverse, you're probably going to have some sort of cryptocurrency. How do you protect it? Individuals can also consider pseudonymity. Boy, that's a big word. Be pseudonymous. You can have some pseudonymous accounts where you interact in parts of the metaverse in ways that nobody can track it back to you, the individual. This may be a layer of security and privacy that helps people out. I think we individuals also need to develop our expectations and requirements for others. What do we require from the communities that we want to interact with? What do we want from the companies that we will buy services and products from? What do we want our governments to do when it comes to the metaverse? Let's think through this stuff. Let's also, when I say know before you go, develop our own expectations before we move into the metaverse and understand how that community or that metaverse treats its users. I talked about this threat of mass languor, the mental weakness. I'm not sure how to inoculate the country or the world from this kind of threat, except on an individual level. Individuals need to make a commitment to continue to exercise self-discipline and continue to learn things outside the metaverse. That's the only thing I can think of. But again, would love your thoughts on that or anything else. But let's talk about the next level of this framework, the communities. People who come together in metaverse communities to build things, maybe it's a distributed organization, need to think about how they can improve the situation also and how to be more secure. They need to set goals and understand that there's things that they need to do to mitigate the use of bullying, to mitigate the threat of fraud, of manipulation, of misogynistic behavior, other bad evils. The community needs to sort this out. And they need to do this with feedback from the real users to do it in a way that the users want. It's also important for communities to be protective, to protect information and protect data. And that requires interoperable standards for store of value. I think that is Ethereum based, but we'll see. It's something we in the security community really should understand, but it's going to be take convincing of us to convince communities of this. Security and privacy really need to be considered at the very beginning. And there needs to be reviews of that and audits and testing and red teaming of these kind of capabilities. Here's a hard one. I mentioned the ownerphrenia. This is important to kind of mitigate. But how do you do that in a way that respects privacy? Well, I hope communities can find a way to do that. We don't want people who are so detached from reality they can't tell reality from fantasy. But we want to be able to spot when that's occurring in a way that does not violate privacy. So it could be quite a challenge. Let's talk about companies. I think, again, we individuals need to state requirements for companies. Companies need to understand that in a free enterprise system, profit is great and that's good, but it should not be at the expense of communities and the people and personal privacy. And just like in communities, we need the companies to understand that privacy and security need to be built in at the beginning. There needs to be a resourcing given to security at companies, and this includes resourcing for testing and red teaming. There are ways to mitigate risk to privacy, and those should be ways developed with communities and individuals. Governments, what do we want the government to do? We as individuals should build a framework and explain to the government how important it is that they play the right role and not the wrong role. I think the government should establish incentives for companies and communities, incentives to get them to build privacy in at the beginning. I also think that government should find ways to track the hostile actors, including the hostile foreign nations, and mitigate their use of the metaverse and warn us when the bad guys are coming for us. There's also a smart role for law enforcement. Nobody wants continuous surveillance by law enforcement either, but there is a role for law enforcement, right, to fight fraud and fight criminals. And when we lose something, there's a role for law enforcement to help us get that back and bring the bad guys to justice. But how do we do that in a way that does not entail massive government surveillance? Well, I don't know the full answer, but I do know this. We want the government to stay on the side of human rights and protecting privacy. We also want the government to share threat intel, and that's pretty easy to see. Would love your feedback on all of that. For academia, we want them to teach. We want them to teach privacy and security, and they also build. There's a lot of builders in academia. This is a place where they can teach building in security and privacy at the very beginning. With that, would love your feedback, comments, questions. Would love a dialogue in any way that is easy for you. Send me an email at bob@uda.com. Ask for this slide deck. I'll send it to you. You can send me thoughts back. One thing I'm sure we should all do, a strong recommendation, is we should build our requirements for the metaverse. What do we want out of the metaverse? And as security professionals, what do we recommend to other individuals, companies, communities, governments, academia? And also as security professionals, I think it's important for us to teach what we know on how to protect ourselves in the metaverse. That's the key recommendation. We have a few minutes left. Would love input on questions, but first some closing thoughts. Wynn in his keynote mentioned this guy, Claude Shannon, and I think very prescient. This thing he said here in 1949, assume the enemy knows the system, is still so relevant even as we're building the metaverse. We have to assume the enemy knows the system. John Boyd, Matt and I named our company after the OODA loop, which was created by Boyd. Also says something I think we need to understand about the metaverse. We need to make decisions and we need to take action. And it's important not to just decide and pontificate and take no action. And we need a security strategy. Is it going to be the same old security strategy? Probably not. I think we're going to need new approaches, and that's why we have this new framework. This framework has to consider the adversary. The adversary is going to do what they're going to do. They're going to seek to crush us. We should seek to keep them out of the metaverse and allow us to do what we can without them watching over our shoulder. I love this quote from Dune, and I wanted to end with this because we're talking about AI now and systems designed to set us free. And I just thought it was such a prescient setup to a great book and a couple of great movies that we talk about AI and the fact that machines should set us free. But if we're not careful, these things can be horrible and bad, especially when hostile foreign powers and criminal groups take over. And with that, that is the key components I wanted to share with you here. Would love to get any instantaneous feedback you can give me on this presentation, any ideas and suggestions before we transition to our next presentation here.
Thank you. Awesome talk. There's a few questions here, and then afterwards, please transition to the speaker after talk room. There's a panel here on your right, and you can join us and carry on conversation and dialogue. So again, thank you for this very, how do I say it, stimulating talk, and gives us a lot to think about, don't we? As well as plan, and as we approach our new world, this new metaverse world, we're all going to be surrounded by. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay. Garrett asked a question here: who do you think should hold these different metaverse communities accountable? That's a very good question, because there needs to be some way to incentivize them to do the right thing, and that means holding them accountable. So I think that's an important question. Even though I don't fully understand the answer to that, I do know it's an important question. There is a role for government if it has to do with violating the law, but there's so many things that companies could do that are bad but are not violating the law. And how do we hold them accountable? I think maybe the answer is individuals need to find a way to hold communities accountable by forming our own communities. And Garrett's made a statement after that question saying, I feel like with the opportunities the metaverse may present, a lot of people's importance of their own privacy will outweigh a lot of people's importance of their own privacy. That's right. It could be. A lot of people are going to see the metaverse as so enticing and just so exciting that you forget and don't think enough about the violations of your own privacy until it's too late. And I think, unfortunately, that is a real and serious threat. As for which organizations in government, the previous two waves of the internet, the government's approach was, we know we're not in charge, we know we're not in command, but we can facilitate information sharing. Government tried over the last 20 years to do a lot of other things, but that support of ISACs and ISOWs seems to be one of the most positive things over the last 20 years. So I'm hoping that the government continues to do that. Encourage, set standards, share information. So that means there would be a role for CISA in the metaverse, which, by the way, if you guys are tracking what's going on at CISA now, I think all of us should be very proud of what they have been doing in this Log4j attack and, vulnerability. It just shows how key of a role that place can have. And I'm hoping they just enhance that when it comes to the metaverse. Wynn here says, how different is the meta security needs versus what we've been trying for 30 years? I think we have to keep everything up that we've been trying for 30 years because all of that is still with us. And we never figured out how to rightly defend that. And now we're adding on top of that, this metaverse. It's going to make our jobs tougher. So it's different in that it's tougher. It's continuous. It's persistent. It's also different in that the bad guys are going to see new targets like our cryptocurrencies. So we're going to have to find new ways to share best practices to more and more and more people, I think. Rich asked, is there hope for protection of privacy when up against the profit motives for personal information? Boy, I don't know. I try to be an optimist. I try to have hope, but it can seem to be very discouraging sometimes. I know I'm going to fight for my privacy and the privacy of my family. And I hope that we leave the new generation with at least some privacy protections. But it's going to be a constant fight and a constant struggle. Folks, we have a few more minutes, so I would love to share a few more graphics if we have time. While you guys think up your questions, please let me know what you're thinking. Here's a few other graphics. Another from Dune. As security folks, maybe the people who attack us in the metaverse are going to be doing us favors, because our enemies there are going to strengthen us. And if it's too much goodness and not enough early attacks, we might get weak. And I love this kind of line from Dune, that our enemies strengthen us and our allies weaken. That's pretty harsh, really. It's not always that way. But there is some truth to that. If we should be learning from our adversaries, and therefore they make us stronger. Another that plays directly into the domain of misinformation and disinformation from Dune is the fact that knowledge is dangerous. It's belief that can be manipulated. And I think our adversaries know that well. And they manipulate our belief by feeding us little pockets of truth to pit us against one another. We will see more of this in the metaverse, I'm positive. For the risk management professionals out there, here's another to think about when it comes to the metaverse. I've never had a problem with the metaverse. It's always worked for me. It's always okay. I've never had a crash of the metaverse. And that's kind of like Captain Smith of the Titanic. In all his experience, he had never been in an accident. So, food for thought. I guess real food for thought is from this guy, Win Schwartau. Man, he's been nailing it for years. He told us in 1991, government and commercial computer systems are so poorly protected that they can essentially be considered defenseless. I guess it's an indictment on all of us that this is still true today. And I'm afraid it may still be true in the metaverse. Unless, Win, if you're still there, would you like to restate this or retract this, or tell us if you would say this a different way? And that, folks, ends our presentation. And let me stop sharing here. And if you have any other questions, there's Win with a comment that maybe I shouldn't say if it's being recorded, but Win said it, so I'll say it. He said, same old shit today. Yeah, I know. If you're a security professional, I guess one that we really have to keep thinking is, this will never stop, no matter what they call it. And, it's the metaverse will be the next wave. Security professionals will still be busy every single day. You'll be doing this for as long as you want. Everybody, please, I want to say thank you for listening. Please give me feedback via any path you want. Send me an email. I'm at bob@uda.com, and I'll send you these graphics. And then if you read them and send me more thoughts back, I just really appreciate it.